The history of English literature is pretty much the basic knowledge that you have to obtain in order to become qualified enough to attend the UGC NET exam. When it comes to the preparation of this particular exam, it's not quite easy because with respect to other fields and other branches of study, there are certain limitations as to the concepts, as to the facts that a person could learn. But when it comes to the English literature is a vast ocean where there are so many different literatures and so many different writers from those literatures, and also those writers have come up with so many different works, and hence you will find it find yourself sinking in the vast ocean of literature. Here at Litreal, we tend to go with a different approach, a vastly different approach when it comes to the training of students with respect to the UGC NET exam. And this course 001 will be dealing with a brief overview of the history of English literature. The history of English literature is kind of the foundational stone that every aspirant has to lay down in their whole prospect of preparing for the UGC NET exam. This forms the fundamental core of your preparation of the UGC NET exam, and hence having a brief overview of it would enable you to understand the flow of things, how things came to be, how writers wrote, and why they wrote them. And next you will be having a bird's eye view of everything, an entire age, and in this particular aspect you will be dealing with the old English period. And having a bird's eye view is quite essential because here at Litreal we follow the method of moving from the general to the specific. In this three-tier structure, we will be dealing with the history of the period, the monarchs that ruled those periods, as well as the age. And having this particular course, which extends up to 10 classes, this class included, will be dealing with separate ages. And there is always a comparative method that we often employ when it comes to teaching history of English literature. You see, no age in English literature is self-confined. You cannot pick it out, you cannot dissect it and take it as the only thing essential for your study. Every age in literature has to be compared with the previous age as well as the age that comes after it. And next we have three different parts of the three-tier structure, that they will be the history, the monarch, and then the age. History is a straight line. You should understand that history being a straight line is quite useful for us. It's a bit of an advantage to us because this enables us to understand the movement that occurs within a group of people, within a language, within a country, and this actually helps us in understanding how English literature actually came to be. Having a bird's eye view would enable you to find the writers and their period, the age that they lived in. Having a basic understanding of the whole history of the age will make it easier for you to understand, or to make it easier for you to grasp that this writer wrote this and this writer has come up with this aspect. And what makes the prospect of preparing for the UGC NET exam easier is that if you could just say, even from your own mouth, if you could just say, what am I going to do? I'm just going to cover 1,000 years of literature. That's much easier to do. That makes the whole endeavor a possibility. And these are all the advantages that you're going to get by attending the course 001 History of English. You could see that Claudius arrived in England in 43 AD. Then you have the formation of Londinium. Londinium is actually the place where Roman Empire stated it as their capital. And you see so many different historical events happening, but these historical events tend to shape up what would be the literature that is about to come. It would shape up the people who designed literature after this particular age. There are a group of people known as the Celts, and these Celts were a group of Germanic tribes who at that time moved from one part of the world to the other when they started exploring, when they started migrating to different parts of the world from the Indo-European branch. And these Celts, they were the first to arrive in what would be the island of Britain. And when they first arrived, there were another group of people who belonged to that particular Celtic race, and they were called Britons. And these Britons were the first to occupy the island of Britain, and they lived much content with themselves because they were a nomadic tribe. They had hunting and farming as their activity. They were not much of a warrior kind of people. They were much content with their own life. Though they were a bit barbaric when compared to the other civilizations of that period, they tended to live in harmonious unity with themselves because they spoke the language of Celtic as well as Gaelic. They worshipped nature and they were highly religious. They settled their disputes with the Druids. Druids are actually priests who belong to the race of Britons. And the religion that Britons followed are highly debatable for now because many people tend to think that they followed the Norse religion, where gods like Thor and other mythological figures were worshipped. But we tend to generally name them as pagans because pagan religion is a religion that is generally ascribed to not being Christian. So these Britons were a happy bunch of people who have just occupied an island, and they were just spending their days in an island safe and secure from the rest of the world. But that came to an end when Julius Caesar came to England came to this particular island to seize it because he was actually much focused upon another island that was much close to it. But he also wanted to conquer what would be modern day Britain. But conquering Britain was not a simple aspect because the Britons, though they were much softer and much peace-loving people, when it comes to war, they were ferocious. And the Britons, they collaborated with the other races that came with them into the other parts of the island, and they fought against the Romans. And the first effort of Julius Caesar came to a terrible defeat because Caesar had to try again and again. He was not able to conquer the entire island. And after Caesar's return, after Caesar's complete defeat, that came Claudius. And Claudius, he came in 43 AD. And you could see 53 BC and 43 AD as a span of 100 years. And after Caesar's return back to Rome, you find Claudius coming back after 100 years with a much powerful army, and with this cunning intent to grab the entire nation proves fruitful. So the Romans occupy what would be England, and currently the Britons who lived there came under the rule of the Romans. So these Britons who have surrendered themselves to the Romans, they grew soft. They grew much softer. They could not handle war. They were completely dependent upon the Roman people because the Romans, they actually spoiled them. Romans had developed a civilization back home that was much advanced than the other civilizations of the world. They were the first to have roadways, homes that were warm, and so many different industrial as well as mechanical advancements. So these Romans, they brought everything from Rome, and they developed what would be roads, houses, places of worship, and so on. And these Britons, having been ruled by the Romans for more than 300 years, that's right, the Romans occupied the island for 300 years, and approximately speaking. In that 300 years, the Britons, who are a group of people who are able to fend off against the Romans, have become relatively much weaker and much softer and much disagreeable to war. So after the island was claimed by the Roman Empire, this is a much important point to note. After the island was completely under the Roman control, the island was given the name Provincia Britannia. So having many historians, they tend to debate upon the fact that the name Britain came from the actual people who first inhabited it, the Britons. But some others, they tend to challenge it by saying that the island of the country got its name from this particular nomenclature that was handed over to them by the Romans. So Provincia Britannia was the period was the place that was England in that particular period under Roman control. So when Provincia Britannia became the entire occupation of the Roman Empire, they needed a capital. They needed a place where they could claim as the center of the land. And with regard to that, a place called Londinium was considered the capital of Provincia Britannia. So, by the sound of Londinium, you could understand that it is where the modern day London is actually located in. So, you cannot actually say that Londinium became London, but you could understand how Londinium or the place or the actual geographical location that is today's London was named as the capital of the entire island. It was also due to the Romans. And you find the Romans developing the entire island as a nation. The Britons were growing much timid. They were not fighting against them. They were not revolting against the Romans. But soon you could find that the whole history of this period is a clash of invasions. You find one group of people invading the island, and you could find that as soon as those people inhabit that island, another group of people will attack them. So as the story goes, after Britons, the Romans have conquered the entire island, and after that, the Britons have, under the control of the Romans, are still attacked by a group of people called the Picts and the Scots. And the Picts and the Scots were generally very violent. They were barbaric. They were a bunch of seafarers who were looting every piece of land that they set their sights on. But with regard to, you could see this map depicting how the Picts were attacking the island from every part of from every direction. So even from 350 AD, these severe attacks from the Picts and the Scots were becoming so regular that the Romans could not find it easier to fend them off. You could see Hadrian's Wall being built in 128 AD, and Hadrian is actually a Roman emperor, and he builds a wall in order to fend off the barbarians from entering into the province of what would be the Roman occupation. But even after that, you could see that these Picts and the Scots were attacking the island from all directions, and they were becoming much more difficult to handle. And at the same time, it's funny how history plays out. At the same time, Romans were finding it difficult to have control over the island because they were having trouble back in Rome. They were finding it difficult to uphold the actual Roman Empire in Italy. So, since the Roman Empire was beginning to fall or facing a much difficult task, the Romans completely desert the island in 410 AD. So the 300 years of dominating the island comes to an end by a foreign invasion, and that would be the Picts and the Scots. And even after AD, you could see that the 400 years that spans out, you see three different races of people intermingling with each other inside the same island. I know this particular session would seem more like a history class rather than a literature class, but this is pretty much important to understand the whole scope of literature that rises off or takes off after this. So the Picts and the Scots, they begin to attack the island. They were much ferocious than any other race of people, and in order to fend off the Picts and the Scots, the Britons develop a much advanced idea, and this is where they have done what would be digging their own graves, because the Britons, having been under the Roman rule for more than 300 years, have now become more soft and more foreign to war. They were essentially warriors, but the 300 years have taken away the warrior spirit in them, and now when they were much vulnerable to attacks, the Romans had completely deserted them, and they were left to fend themselves on their own. So in this particular juncture, the Britons, they connived an idea in order to employ certain race of people to fend off the Picts and the Scots. So these mercenaries who fought for money, who were employed by the Britons, were actually Angles and Saxons. And this is how the Angles and the Saxons first came to England. And when the Angles and Saxons came to England, they were able to fend off the Picts and the Scots, and they were able to protect the island from foreign invasions. But in this particular turn of events, the Angles and Saxons, they believed that we protected this island, we have saved these people, and why should we bother to leave? So and again, since the Britons were so weak to do anything about it, the Angles and Saxons began to settle inside the island. The hordes and hordes of people from these two tribes began migrating to the island of Britain. So the entire period between 400 AD to 1066 AD, you could see that many different races of people migrating to this particular island, and and having covered the first 500 years of British history, you have seen the Britons, the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons, and soon you will find the Jutes coming in. And England has become what would be a culmination of different races, different people, and this this really added to the flavor of the literature that was about to come in this particular language. So the Picts and Scots were a group of Celts who occupied Scotland. So if you could see the map here, you could find where the Picts and the Scots actually came from. So they were geographically in a much more easier spot to plan their attacks and dominate the entire land. But because of the Angles and Saxons, this was averted for a long period of time. But soon the Picts and the Scots, they were fended off, and their goals of achieving the island became diminished. And the Angles and Saxons, they dominated the entire island from 450 AD to 600 AD. So the domination of the Angles and Saxons as a group of people claiming the entire island for themselves could be seen in what would be the formation of the Heptarchy. So the Heptarchy is actually a culmination of 7 different kingdoms. The Greek word or the Greek meaning for Heptarchy would be approximately told as rule of 7. And the Heptarchy can be seen as one of the most fundamental signs of growth that indicate that people are actually growing up to be a civilization, a community, and later on a country for that matter. So the Angles, they formed what would be the northern and eastern parts of England. So they migrated mostly to what would be Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia. So these were the parts that the Angles prominently migrated to and dominated the entire land. So these 3 kingdoms were the most dominant kingdoms in the Heptarchy. Then came the Saxons. The Saxons, they formed kingdoms in the south. So hence the name came Wessex, Sussex, and Essex. So in order to make this particular fact a much memorable one, you could just say that the Angles were actually called Anglia. So Anglia, Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia, and hence those names are very much relevant to each other. And when you come to Wessex and Essex and Sussex, you could just say that they were West Saxons, South Saxons, and East Saxons. So it's part of their own word nomenclature that they developed Wessex, Essex, and Sussex. So what does Kent do? So Kent is probably the most weakest kingdom in the Heptarchy at this point when the Heptarchy was beginning. And the Jutes that came from Jutland, and the actual backstory of the Jutes is not quite clear in history, but the Jutes pretty much came from Jutland and they settled in what would be Kent. And this map is very important for you to understand how language came to be. Dealing with literary works comes secondary, though it's a much frugal task. It comes secondary. The primary task is that you should be able to identify the confinements or the demarcations that each age has in the history of English literature,